The gunshot echoed through the canyon, sending a flock of startled crows into the crimson sunset sky as Eleanor Sinclair crouched behind the sun-bleached boulder, her trembling hands reloading the revolver with the last of her bullets. It was 1875 in the Arizona Territory, and she had traveled too far to die now. "You can't hide forever, Miss Sinclair," the bounty hunter's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "The reward for the notorious Black Rose of Boston is mighty tempting, even if you are just a woman." Eleanor's chest tightened. She'd fled 2,000 miles, changed her name, her appearance, her entire life, all to escape the shadow of her past. But somehow they'd found her anyway. The stagecoach she'd been riding had been ambushed just outside of Promise Creek, and she'd barely escaped with her life and the small carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world. Night was falling fast. If she could just hold out until darkness, she might have a chance to slip away. The bounty hunter's footsteps crunched on loose gravel, drawing closer. Eleanor held her breath, pressing herself against the rough surface of the rock. "Now, Miss Sinclair, I'm a reasonable man. Come quiet-like, and I won't have to damage that pretty face of yours before I bring you back to Boston." The sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the air, but it hadn't come from the bounty hunter. "I believe the lady isn't interested in your proposition." The new voice was deep, steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as a local. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the bounty hunter snarled. "Any man pointing a gun at a woman on Kierney land makes it my business." The tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Eleanor peered around the edge of the boulder, seeing the standoff for the first time. The bounty hunter, a wiry man with a scarred face, stood with his pistol half raised. Facing him, atop a chestnut stallion, sat a broad-shouldered man, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, a Winchester rifle aimed steadily at the bounty hunter's chest. "She's wanted back east." "There's a reward," the bounty hunter persisted. "Don't much care about that," the cowboy replied evenly. "What I do care about is that you're trespassing and threatening someone who appears to be in distress." Eleanor watched as the bounty hunter's eyes darted around, calculating his odds. Finally, he lowered his weapon slightly. "This ain't over," he spat, backing away slowly. "You can't protect her forever, rancher." "I don't need forever," the cowboy replied, "just long enough for you to disappear from my land." The bounty hunter retreated to his horse, never fully turning his back on them. He mounted in one fluid motion and with a final venomous glare spurred his horse into a gallop down the canyon. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded did Eleanor allow herself to exhale. She stepped out from behind the boulder, her legs shaky beneath her dusty skirts. The cowboy dismounted and approached her slowly, as one might a spooked horse. Now she could see him clearly, tall and solid, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wasn't young, perhaps in his early 30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and smiling in equal measure. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Samuel Kierney." "That fella won't be back tonight, but I can't promise he won't return with friends." Eleanor clutched her carpetbag tighter. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Kierney, but I should be on my way." "To where, if you don't mind my asking?" "Promise Creek is still 5 miles off, and night's falling fast. These canyons aren't safe after dark. Cougars, coyotes, and men worse than either." Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct honed from years of running told her to flee, to trust no one. But exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand, and the reality of her situation was stark. She had nowhere to go, little money left, and a bounty hunter who knew her location. "I was headed to Promise Creek," she admitted. "I have a letter of introduction to the school teacher there. I'm hoping to find work." Samuel Kierney studied her for a long moment, his gaze neither lecherous nor judgmental, just assessing. "My ranch is just over that ridge. My sister Rose is there, so you needn't worry about propriety. You're welcome to a meal and a safe place to rest tonight. Tomorrow I can take you into town." Eleanor weighed her options quickly. A night of safety might give her time to form a better plan, and the mention of a sister eased her immediate concerns. "That's very kind, Mr. Kierney. I accept your offer." He nodded once, then reached for her bag. "May I?" She relinquished it reluctantly, and he secured it to his saddle before turning back to her. "Can you ride, Miss Sinclair?" "Eleanor Sinclair." The name still felt strange on her tongue after 6 months of using it. And yes, I can ride. Good. He offered his hand to help her mount. You can take Brutus. I'll walk alongside. The touch of his calloused hand against hers sent an unexpected warmth through her arm. Eleanor quickly dismissed it as the natural reaction of a body too long deprived of human contact. She settled into the saddle, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. As they made their way through the gathering darkness, Eleanor studied the landscape, memorizing landmarks, calculating routes of escape should she need them. Old habits died hard. "What brings you to Promise Creek, Miss Sinclair?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking the comfortable silence between them. Eleanor had prepared this answer long ago. "I was a teacher's assistant in St. Louis. After my parents passed, I decided a change might be beneficial. Promise Creek could use a good teacher. The last one left 6 months ago to marry a railroad man from Denver." "And what of you, Mr. Kierney?" Eleanor asked, deflecting attention from herself. "Have you always been in this territory, born and raised on this ranch?" "My father came out here in '49 not for gold but for land. Met my mother, who was traveling west with her family. They built the Lazy K from nothing." Pride colored his voice. "When they passed 5 years ago, my sister and I took over. They crested a small hill, and the ranch appeared below them, a sprawling main house built of solid timber, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all nestled in a protected valley with a creek winding through it. Lamplight glowed from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney into the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. Samuel's smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines carved by sun and worry. "It's home." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was younger than Samuel, perhaps 25, with the same storm-gray eyes but honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Sam, we were getting worried." She stopped short when she spotted Eleanor. "Oh. Hello there. Rose, this is Miss Eleanor Sinclair. She was being harassed by a bounty hunter in the South Canyon. She's headed to Promise Creek seeking work as a teacher, but it's too late to continue tonight. I've offered our hospitality." Rose's welcoming smile eased more of Eleanor's tension. "Of course, come in, come in. Supper's nearly ready and you must be exhausted. I'm Rose Kierney." Samuel helped Eleanor dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact made her pulse quicken, a reaction she firmly attributed to her recent brush with danger. "Thank you, Miss Kierney. I don't wish to impose." "Nonsense. We don't get many visitors out here, especially not female ones. It'll be nice to have another woman to talk to." Rose linked her arm through Eleanor's and guided her toward the house. "Sam, take care of Brutus and wash up." Supper in 20 minutes. The interior of the Kierney home was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with colorful woven rugs. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main room, filled with volumes that made Eleanor's heart leap with unexpected joy. It had been months since she'd had access to books. "Let me show you where you can freshen up," Rose said, leading Eleanor to a small bedroom. "You can use my room. There's water in the pitcher and towels there on the stand." "You're very kind," Eleanor said, setting down her carpet bag. Rose paused at the door. "Whatever trouble you're running from, Miss Sinclair, you're safe here tonight." Eleanor froze. "I don't know what you mean." Rose's smile was gentle. "I grew up with 3 older brothers before Sam and I lost James and William to the war. I know the look of someone who's been hunted." She held up a hand as Eleanor began to protest. "I'm not asking for your story. Just know that while you're under our roof, no harm will come to you." With that, she closed the door, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the heaviness of secrets that seemed impossible to escape. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden Rose proudly maintained. The conversation remained light, with Rose doing most of the talking, chattering about Promise Creek, its inhabitants, and the latest news that had reached them through travelers and the monthly mail delivery. "The town's growing," Samuel explained as he passed Eleanor a second helping of stew she hadn't requested, but found herself hungry for nonetheless. "The silver mine to the north has brought in new folks, and the railroad's supposed to put a spur line through within the next year or two." Which means we might finally get regular mail service, Rose added. And a proper doctor. Old Doc Wilson does his best, but he's nearly 70 and his hands shake something fierce when he's stitching wounds. Eleanor smiled politely, absorbing every detail that might prove useful. And the school, what condition is it in? It's a solid building, Samuel said. 2 rooms with living quarters attached for the teacher. The town council maintains it well enough. Though the books are terribly outdated, Rose interjected. The last shipment was delayed somewhere in Kansas and never arrived. The children make do with what they have, but it's far from ideal. Eleanor nodded, already cataloging ways she might improve the situation if she secured the position. Teaching had been her passion before. Everything changed. She'd been good at it too, before her name became synonymous with scandal and ruin back east. After dinner, Rose insisted on showing Eleanor some of her prized possessions, a collection of illustrated botanical journals she'd ordered from back east, and a stereoscope with views of Europe that had been their mother's. Samuel excused himself to check on the livestock one final time before turning in, and Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly in his absence. Though he'd been nothing but courteous, his perceptive gaze made her feel as though he could see through the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. When he returned, Rose was in the midst of showing Eleanor their family photographs. This was taken just before James and William left for the war, she was saying, pointing to a daguerreotype of 4 children, a gangly teenage Samuel and 3 other boys of varying ages, all with the same serious expression. They never came home. I'm sorry for your loss, Eleanor said softly. It was a long time ago, Samuel said from the doorway, his voice quiet. But not a day passes that we don't think of them. The clock on the mantel chimed 9 and Rose stifled a yawn. Goodness, is it that late already? I should turn in the morning comes early on a ranch. Indeed it does, Samuel agreed. Miss Sinclair, if you'd like to leave for town after breakfast, I can have the wagon ready by 8. Eleanor hesitated. The logical course would be to continue to Promise Creek as planned. Yet something about the Kierney ranch, its isolation, perhaps, or the genuine warmth of its inhabitants made her reluctant to leave so soon. Actually, she said slowly, if it wouldn't be an imposition, I wonder if I might impose on your hospitality for another day or 2. I find myself more fatigued from my journey than I realized. The siblings exchanged a glance that Eleanor couldn't quite interpret. Of course, Rose said warmly. Stay as long as you need. Thank you. Eleanor managed a smile, ignoring the voice in her head that warned against lingering anywhere too long. I promise I won't be underfoot. Perhaps I could help with some chores to earn my keep. No need for that, Samuel replied, but if you're set on it, I'm sure Rose would welcome the company in her garden tomorrow. I would indeed, Rose beamed. It's been ages since I've had a friend to talk with while I work. The word friend struck Eleanor like a physical blow. How long had it been since anyone had used that term for her? Since Boston, at least, before everything fell apart. Then it's settled, she said, pushing away the memories. Good night, and thank you both again for your kindness. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in Rose's room, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods outside, the occasional hoot of an owl. So different from the constant noise of the cities she'd fled through, the crowded boarding houses where she'd hidden, always alert, always afraid. She thought of Samuel Kierney, of his steady presence and the way he'd faced down the bounty hunter without hesitation. Men like him were rare in her experience, men who did the right thing simply because it was right, not for reward or recognition. Stop it, she chided herself. You're leaving soon. You can't afford attachments. Attachments meant vulnerability, and vulnerability would get her killed or worse, sent back to Boston to face a hangman's noose for a crime she hadn't committed. With that sobering thought, Eleanor finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of running down endless corridors, always with the sound of pursuit just behind her. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. Eleanor dressed quickly in one of her two remaining dresses, a serviceable navy blue cotton with minimal adornment, and pinned her dark hair into a simple chignon before joining the Kierneys in the kitchen. "Good morning," Rose greeted her cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Eleanor lied, accepting a cup of coffee from Samuel, who nodded silently in greeting. Breakfast was hearty eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, and more of the excellent coffee. Samuel ate quickly, explaining that he needed to ride out to check on a section of fence that had been reported damaged by one of his ranch hands. "Will you be gone long?" Rose asked, passing him more biscuits. "Most of the day, likely." Johnson said the damage was extensive, probably caused by those wild horses that have been roaming the north pasture. He turned to Eleanor. "If you'd like to ride into town tomorrow instead, I can take you then." "Tomorrow would be fine," Eleanor replied. "I appreciate your flexibility." He nodded, draining his coffee cup and rising from the table. "Ladies, if you'll excuse me." After he'd left, Rose turned to Eleanor with a sparkle in her eye. "Well, if you're to help me in the garden today, we should find you something more suitable to wear than that lovely dress." An hour later, Eleanor found herself kneeling in the rich soil of Rose's vegetable garden, wearing a borrowed skirt and blouse that were far more practical for the task at hand. The morning sun was warm but not yet oppressive, and there was something deeply satisfying about working with her hands, pulling weeds from around the thriving tomato plants and bean vines. "You've done this before," Rose observed, working a few feet away. Eleanor nodded. "My mother kept a garden when I was young. I used to help her." It was one of the few true things she'd shared about her past since arriving. "Sam says you're from St. Louis." Eleanor's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. "Yes, most recently. And before that, Philadelphia." "Boston before that." She kept her tone casual, though her heart had begun to race. "You've traveled quite a bit." "I suppose I have." Rose sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. "I've never been further east than Kansas City. What's it like living in those big cities?" Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Crowded, noisy. There's a certain energy to them, a constant motion that can be exhilarating or exhausting depending on one's mood." She pulled a particularly stubborn weed, its roots clinging tenaciously to the soil. "But there's anonymity too, which has its advantages." "I can't imagine wanting to be anonymous," Rose said. "Here, everyone knows everyone else's business, which can be tiresome, but there's comfort in it too. If you're in trouble, help is never far away." "Unless the trouble comes from those same people who know your business," Eleanor replied before she could stop herself. Rose studied her thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose that's true enough." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic task allowing Eleanor's mind to wander. She found herself thinking of Samuel again, wondering what it would be like to have roots somewhere, to belong to a place as completely as he belonged to this ranch. "He's not always so quiet, you know," Rose said suddenly. Eleanor looked up, startled. "I beg your pardon, Sam." "He's not usually so reserved, he's just cautious around strangers." Rose smiled fondly. "The war changed him. He came back different, more serious, more watchful, but underneath he's still the same big brother who taught me to ride and shoot and read the stars." "He fought in the war?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "Cavalry, came home with a bullet in his shoulder that still troubles him when the weather changes." Rose's expression grew somber. "Unlike James and William, who didn't come home at all." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "Losing family is never easy." "No, it isn't," Rose agreed. "Is that what happened to you? Did you lose someone?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. In a way, she'd lost everyone and everything her parents years before through illness, her reputation and livelihood through betrayal, her home and security through false accusation. "Yes," she said simply. "I lost everything." Rose reached across the row of plants and squeezed Eleanor's soil-stained hand. "Well, perhaps Promise Creek will be a place to find something new." The genuine compassion in Rose's voice nearly undid Eleanor's careful composure. She blinked rapidly, focusing on the plants before her. "Perhaps," she managed, "though I've learned not to hope for too much." The day passed pleasantly, with Rose proving to be excellent company, talkative enough to fill the silences but perceptive enough not to press when Eleanor deflected personal questions. They worked in the garden until the midday heat drove them inside, where Rose taught Eleanor how to make her mother's famous apple pie for that evening's dessert. As the afternoon waned, Eleanor found herself on the front porch with a glass of lemonade, watching the dust cloud that signaled Samuel's return from the distant pastures. There was something compelling about the man, a quiet strength that drew her despite her determination to remain detached. He rode into the yard, his horse kicking up dust that glowed golden in the late afternoon light. He dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his size, then noticed her on the porch and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Miss Sinclair, enjoying the view. It's quite different from what I'm accustomed to, she replied, but beautiful in its own way. He unsaddled his horse, taking care with each movement. Most folks either love it immediately or count the days until they can leave, not much middle ground when it comes to ranch country. And which were you? He glanced up, a hint of surprise in his expression. I never had to decide. This land is in my blood. He patted his horse's neck. Would you like to see more of it? There's still an hour or so of daylight left. The invitation was unexpected. I wouldn't want to keep you from your work. Day's work is done. He gestured toward the barn. There's a gentle mare that would suit you if you're interested. Eleanor hesitated. Riding out alone with him would be improper by Eastern standards, but frontier customs were different. And something in her yearned to see more of this land that had shaped the Kierneys. I'd like that, she decided. Let me change into something more suitable. 20 minutes later, mounted on a placid bay mare named Daisy, Eleanor followed Samuel along a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills behind the ranch house. The evening air was cooler here, fragrant with pine and sage. Rose tells me you fought in the war, Eleanor said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Samuel nodded, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. 3rd Cavalry saw action at Valverde, Glorieta Pass, and a dozen smaller skirmishes most folks back east never heard of. The Western theater wasn't as widely reported, Eleanor agreed. I've read accounts, though. He glanced back at her. You read military histories. Heat crept into her cheeks. Ladies weren't supposed to show interest in such things. I read whatever I can find. Knowledge is valuable. That it is. He slowed his horse as they approached a ridge. We're almost there. Almost where? My favorite spot on the whole ranch. They crested the ridge and Eleanor caught her breath. The valley spread out below them, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The ranch buildings looked like toys from this height, the creek a silver ribbon winding through the landscape. Beyond, the mountains rose in purple majesty, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. It's magnificent, she whispered. Samuel dismounted and offered a hand to help her down. My father used to bring us up here when we were boys. Said a man needed to see his place in the world from time to time, not just the small piece he worked, but how it fit into the greater whole. Eleanor accepted his help, all too aware of his strength as he easily lifted her from the saddle. She stepped away quickly, moving toward the edge of the ridge to better appreciate the view. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Samuel joined her, keeping a respectful distance. Tough as rawhide, but fair, taught us that a man's word was his bond and that the land would provide if we respected it. Eleanor studied his profile, strong and weathered like the landscape around them. You must miss him. Every day. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face. What about you, Miss Sinclair? What did your father teach you? The unexpected question caught her off guard. To survive, she said softly, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. To keep going no matter what. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. That's no small lesson. No, she agreed, looking back at the valley. It isn't. They stood in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor felt a strange peace settle over her, something she hadn't experienced in longer than she cared to remember. We should head back before it gets dark, Samuel said eventually. The trail can be tricky in low light. The ride back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the barn, Rose was waiting for them, her expression a mixture of relief and amusement. I was beginning to wonder if you'd run off with our guest, Sam, she teased. Just showing her the North Ridge view, he replied, helping Eleanor dismount. Ah, Dad's favorite spot. Rose smiled knowingly. Supper's ready whenever you two are. I've kept it warm. Over dinner, Eleanor found herself more engaged in the conversation than she'd been the previous evening. She shared stories of her teaching experiences, carefully edited to reveal nothing of her true identity, and listened as the siblings reminisced about their childhood on the ranch. Sam was always the serious one, Rose told her, ignoring her brother's look of mock outrage. While James and William were getting into all sorts of mischief, Sam was the one making sure none of us broke our necks in the process. Someone had to be responsible, Samuel defended himself, though a smile played at the corners of his mouth. And now you're the most respected rancher in 3 counties, Rose continued proudly. Even old Judge Hollister says there's no man he'd trust more than Samuel Kierney. Eleanor saw Samuel's discomfort with the praise and deftly changed the subject. Rose, this apple pie is extraordinary. Would you share the recipe with me? The evening passed pleasantly, and when Eleanor finally retired to Rose's room, she found herself reluctant to leave the warmth of the Kierney home. Tomorrow, she told herself firmly, she would go to Promise Creek as planned. She'd inquire about the teaching position, find lodging, and begin building her new life just as she'd done twice before. But as she drifted off to sleep, it was Samuel's face she saw the way he'd looked at her on the ridge, as if trying to see beyond the careful facade she presented to the world. Morning brought a surprise dark clouds gathering on the horizon and a heaviness in the air that promised rain. That's a proper storm brewing, Rose observed at breakfast. First good one of the season, Samuel frowned, looking out the window. If it hits before noon, the creek could rise enough to make the crossing dangerous. Might be best to delay your trip to town, Miss Sinclair. Eleanor felt a complicated mix of relief and anxiety at the prospect of staying longer. I wouldn't want to risk unsafe travel, she agreed. If you're certain I'm not imposing. Not at all, Rose assured her. In fact, I could use help with the preserves I'm planning to put up today. The strawberry patch has been especially productive this year. The storm arrived mid-morning with a fury that justified Samuel's concerns. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley. Inside, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of cooking fruit as Eleanor and Rose worked side by side, preparing jars for the preserves. It's been years since I've done this, Eleanor admitted, carefully wiping the rim of a jar before Rose added the sealing wax. My mother used to make the most wonderful blackberry jam. Where did you grow up? Rose asked. Eleanor hesitated, then decided a partial truth was safe enough. Just outside of Boston, originally. My father was a professor at the university. That explains your education, Rose said approvingly. Sam noticed it right away, said you speak like someone who's read more books than most people in Promise Creek have ever seen. He said that. Eleanor couldn't help feeling pleased, then immediately chided herself for the reaction. He's very observant, my brother. Rose added more sugar to the bubbling pot of strawberries. He also said you have secrets. Eleanor's hands stilled. Everyone has secrets, Miss Kierney. Rose, please, and yes, I suppose that's true. She stirred the pot thoughtfully. But some secrets are heavier than others. Some can crush a person if they carry them alone too long. Eleanor didn't respond, focusing instead on the jar in her hands. After a moment, Rose continued. I'm not asking you to share whatever burden you're carrying. I just want you to know that sometimes, the people we least expect to understand are the ones most capable of helping us. That's very kind, Eleanor said softly, but some problems can't be solved by sharing them. Some only grow larger when exposed to the light. Rose gave her a long, considering look. Perhaps the light is exactly what's needed to make them manageable. They worked in companionable silence after that, the rhythm of their task punctuated by the storm raging outside. By mid-afternoon, they had filled 24 jars with ruby-red preserves, their hands sticky and their aprons stained with fruit juice. This should see us through until next summer, Rose said with satisfaction, surveying their work. And you've earned yourself a jar to take with you when you go. Thank you. Eleanor washed her hands in the basin, and thank you for today. It's been nice working together like this. It has, Rose agreed warmly. I've missed female companionship since our mother passed. The ranch hands are good men, but they're hardly interested in discussing the latest fashions or books. Does it ever get lonely out here? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Rose considered the question. Sometimes. Winter evenings can be long, and there are days when I crave conversation beyond cattle prices and weather predictions. She smiled wryly. I think that's why I've been talking your ear off since you arrived, but mostly no. There's always work to be done, and the land itself is good company if you know how to listen to it. Eleanor thought of the cities she'd fled through the press of humanity, the constant noise, the anonymity that had been both her shield and her prison. I can understand that, she said. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Exactly. Rose glanced toward the window. The rain's letting up. Sam will be back soon. He went to check on the cattle in the south pasture. He worries about the calves in weather like this. As if on cue, they heard the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Rose peered out the window, then frowned. That's not Sam's horse. Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest. She moved to the window, careful to stand to the side where she wouldn't be visible from outside. A man was dismounting, not the bounty hunter from the canyon, but a stranger in a black duster, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. He moved with the deliberate confidence of someone used to commanding attention. Who is it? Eleanor whispered. I don't recognize him, Rose replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Stay here, I'll see what he wants. Rose, wait, but the younger woman was already heading for the door, her chin lifted with the quiet dignity Eleanor had come to associate with the Kierneys. Through the window, Eleanor watched as Rose stepped onto the porch, speaking to the stranger who remained mounted on his horse. The conversation appeared civil enough, but something about the man's posture, the way he leaned forward in his saddle, the tilt of his head set alarm bells ringing in Eleanor's mind. Rose pointed toward the north, presumably giving directions, then turned to come back inside. As she did, the stranger removed his hat briefly in thanks, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of his face, a face she recognized with a jolt of fear. Marshal Thomas Wilcox of the U.S. Marshal's Service, the man who had been hunting her since Boston. Eleanor stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. How had he found her? The bounty hunter must have telegraphed ahead after his encounter with Samuel, alerting the authorities that the woman they sought had been spotted in the territory. She had to leave. Now, Rose came back inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Just a traveler looking for directions to Promise Creek. The storm forced him off the main road. She paused, noticing Eleanor's ashen face. Eleanor, what's wrong? Nothing, Eleanor managed, forcing a smile. Just a momentary dizzy spell. I should lie down for a bit if you don't mind. Rose looked unconvinced but nodded. Of course, rest as long as you need. Eleanor retreated to Rose's room, her mind whirling with desperate calculations. The marshal wouldn't give up easily. He'd likely check every farm and ranch in the area, starting with those closest to where the bounty hunter had reported seeing her. She had perhaps a day at most before he returned. She needed to be gone by then, but where would she go? The storm had made the roads treacherous, and she had no horse, no supplies for another desperate flight. For the first time since she'd begun running, Eleanor felt truly trapped. She paced the small room, possibilities racing through her mind. She could confess everything to the Kierneys, beg for their help, but that would only make them accessories to her flight, putting them in legal jeopardy. She could steal a horse and flee in the night, but the thought of repaying their kindness with theft made her stomach turn. A soft knock at the door interrupted her frantic thoughts. Eleanor, may I come in? It was Rose. Eleanor quickly composed herself, smoothing her hair and taking a deep breath. Of course, Rose entered, carrying a cup of tea. I thought this might help. It's my mother's remedy for frayed nerves, chamomile with a touch of honey. Thank you. Eleanor accepted the cup, forcing her hands not to tremble. Rose sat on the edge of the bed, her expression concerned. That man upset you? It wasn't a question. Eleanor took a sip of tea, playing for time. What makes you say that? You were fine until you saw him. Then you looked as if you'd seen a ghost. Rose's gaze was direct. Was he the one you're running from? The cup in Eleanor's hand wavered. Rose, please, don't ask me questions I can't answer, can't or won't. Both. Eleanor set the cup down, meeting Rose's gaze. The less you know about me, the safer you and your brother will be, understanding dawned in Rose's eyes. "You're in serious trouble, aren't you?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. That would be an understatement. Rose was quiet for a long moment, studying Eleanor's face. "Is it something you did or something done to you?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. No one had asked her that before. They'd all simply assumed her guilt based on the charges against her. "Both," she whispered. "Neither, it's complicated." Rose nodded slowly. "Life usually is." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Rest. We can talk more later if you wish, or not if that's your preference." After Rose left, Eleanor sank onto the bed, the weight of her situation pressing down on her like a physical force. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to stay here, to become part of this household, to wake each morning to the sight of Samuel's steady gaze across the breakfast table. Foolish dreams, she chided herself. "You've been here 2 days, and already you're spinning fantasies." The marshal's arrival was a timely reminder of reality. She was a fugitive, and would remain one until she was caught or cleared her name. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard roused her from her thoughts. She peered cautiously from the window, relieved to see it was Samuel returning, his broad shoulders hunched against the lingering drizzle. The sight of him sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest. She watched as he dismounted and led his horse to the barn, his movements efficient and purposeful. There was something deeply reassuring about Samuel Kierney, a solidness that went beyond his physical presence. He was the kind of man who would stand his ground in a storm, immovable as the mountains that framed his land, which was precisely why she couldn't involve him in her troubles. Men like Samuel lived by a code that valued honesty and justice above all. If he learned she was wanted for murder, his sense of duty would compel him to turn her in, regardless of any personal feelings he might have developed. No, she decided. She would leave at first light, before the marshal could return. She would write a note thanking the Kierneys for their hospitality, making some excuse about an urgent message from Promise Creek. It would be better this way, a clean break, with no chance for Samuel to look at her with disappointment or, worse, disgust when he learned the truth. Decision made, Eleanor lay back on the bed, allowing the exhaustion of the past days to wash over her. She would need her strength for tomorrow's journey, wherever it might lead. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, Rose was gently shaking her awake. "Eleanor, supper's ready if you're feeling up to it." Eleanor blinked, disoriented. The room was darker now, the rain having given way to the deep purple of twilight. "What time is it?" "Just past 7. You've been asleep for a couple of hours." Rose looked concerned. "Are you feeling any better?" "Yes, thank you." Eleanor sat up, smoothing her rumpled skirt. "I'll join you in a moment." In the dining room, Samuel was already seated at the table, his hair still damp from washing up. He rose when Eleanor entered, a gesture of gentlemanly respect that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Miss Sinclair, Rose said you were feeling unwell." "Just tired," Eleanor assured him, taking her seat. "The storm affected me more than I expected." He nodded, though his gaze was searching. "Weather can do that, especially to those not accustomed to our sudden squalls." The meal was simple but hearty, a stew of rabbit and vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and more of Rose's strawberry preserves. The conversation remained light, with Samuel recounting his adventures, checking on the livestock during the storm. "Jenkins swears he saw a mountain lion up by the North Ridge," he was saying, passing the bread to Eleanor. "Says it was big as a horse, though Jenkins is known to exaggerate when he's been into the whiskey." "There was a stranger here earlier," Rose mentioned casually. "Looking for directions to Promise Creek." Samuel's expression sharpened. "What sort of stranger?" "Well-dressed, city man by his speech, said he was a marshal, looking for a fugitive reported in the area." Eleanor nearly choked on her stew. She hadn't known Rose had learned the man's identity or purpose. Samuel glanced at Eleanor, his gaze unreadable. "Did he say who he was looking for?" "A woman," Rose replied, her eyes also flicking to Eleanor. "Didn't give details, but he seemed quite determined." The silence that fell over the table was heavy with unspoken questions. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate, aware of Samuel's steady gaze. "Interesting," he said finally. "Did he say if he'd be returning?" Mentioned he might if his search in town proved fruitless. Rose's voice was deliberately casual. I directed him to the main road. With the creek rising, he won't be able to cross back this way until tomorrow at the earliest. Eleanor looked up at that, meeting Rose's gaze. The younger woman gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She had deliberately misdirected the marshal, buying Eleanor time. The bridge at Miller's Crossing should still be passable, Samuel observed, breaking a piece of bread. If this marshal is in a hurry. I might have forgotten to mention that option, Rose said innocently. Samuel's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Forgetful of you. The siblings exchanged a look that Eleanor couldn't quite interpret, then Samuel turned his attention to her. Miss Sinclair, it seems our trip to Promise Creek tomorrow may need to be postponed again. The creek's running high and I wouldn't want to risk an accident. Eleanor set down her spoon, her appetite gone. Mr. Kierney, I appreciate your concern, but I don't wish to impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. It's no imposition, he assured her. And I'd feel responsible if anything happened to you on the journey. Better to wait until conditions are safer. She recognized the strategy for what it was a graceful way to keep her at the ranch, away from the marshal's search. The Kierneys were protecting her, despite knowing almost nothing about her situation. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. She couldn't allow them to place themselves at risk for her sake. Thank you, she said finally. Perhaps you're right. One more day shouldn't make a difference. After dinner, Rose excused herself to finish some mending, leaving Eleanor and Samuel alone in the main room. He stoked the fire, then settled into a chair across from her, his expression thoughtful. You know, he said quietly, my father used to say that a person's past was their own business, but their future was a shared concern for those who cared about them. Eleanor tensed. A wise philosophy. I thought so. He studied her for a long moment. Miss Sinclair, Eleanor, whatever trouble you're in, whatever you're running from, there might be another way to face it besides running. She laughed softly, without humor. Some things can't be faced, Mr. Kierney, only escaped. Samuel, please. He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. And I don't believe that's true. I've never known a problem that couldn't be solved with enough determination and the right allies. You haven't known many problems like mine, then, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Try me. The simple challenge hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear she'd carried for so long. What if she did tell him everything? What if, for once, she allowed someone else to share the burden she'd been carrying alone? Before she could decide, the sound of a horse approaching at speed broke the moment. Samuel was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. It's Jenkins, he said, frowning. Something must be wrong. He strode to the door, opening it just as the ranch hand reached the porch, his horse lathered from hard riding. Mr. Kierney, Jenkins gasped, clearly agitated. There's a marshal in town, asking questions about a woman matching Miss Sinclair's description. Offering a substantial reward for information leading to her capture. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. What's he saying she's done? Samuel asked, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his stance. Jenkins glanced nervously at Eleanor. Murder, sir. Says she killed a man back east, prominent fellow from what I gathered. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to look at Samuel, certain she would see disgust or anger replacing the warmth that had been there moments before. Thank you, Jenkins, Samuel said evenly. Get yourself something to eat in the kitchen, then head back to the bunkhouse. Not a word of this to anyone else, understood? Yes, sir. Jenkins nodded, casting one more curious glance at Eleanor before disappearing around the side of the house. Samuel closed the door and turned to face her. Eleanor forced herself to meet his gaze, bracing for rejection. Instead, she saw only concern and something else, a determination that took her breath away. It seems, he said quietly, that we have less time than I thought. Tell me everything, Eleanor, starting with who you really are. Eleanor stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. You still want to help me, even knowing what I'm accused of. Accused is not the same as guilty, he replied. And yes, I want to help you. But I can't do that effectively without knowing the full story. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Eleanor sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. My real name is Eleanor Sinclair, she began. That much is true. But in Boston, I was known as Ellie Stevens, and I was a teacher at the Pemberton School for Girls. Samuel sat across from her, his expression attentive but neutral, giving no indication of his thoughts as she spoke. I loved teaching there. The girls were bright, eager to learn. I taught literature and history, subjects many considered too advanced for young women, but the school's headmistress, Mrs. Hawthorne, believed in educating girls as thoroughly as boys. Eleanor paused, gathering her strength for the difficult part of her story. One of the school's benefactors was Charles Winthrop, a wealthy businessman with considerable influence in Boston society. He took a particular interest in the school and eventually in me. Samuel's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. At first, his attention seemed professional. He attended school functions, donated books for the library, expressed admiration for my teaching methods. Then the gifts began small things at first, then increasingly valuable and personal items. I returned them all, of course, with polite notes explaining that I couldn't accept such generosity. She twisted her hands in her lap, remembering the mounting dread she'd felt as Winthrop's pursuit had grown more insistent. He was not accustomed to rejection. When I refused to accompany him to the opera one evening, his manner changed. He became threatening. Said he could have me dismissed, that no one would believe my word against his. Did you report him? Samuel asked. Eleanor laughed bitterly. To whom? He sat on the school's board of trustees. His family had connections throughout Boston society. I did speak to Mrs. Hawthorne, who was sympathetic but cautioned me against making formal accusations without proof. She rose, too agitated to remain seated, and moved to stand before the fire. One night, I was working late at the school, grading examinations. Winthrop appeared in my classroom doorway, clearly intoxicated. He said he was tired of my games, that he always got what he wanted in the end. Samuel's expression darkened, but he let her continue without interruption. He grabbed me, tried to force himself on me. I fought back, struck him with a brass paperweight from my desk. He fell, hit his head on the corner of a bookcase. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, the memory still vivid despite the months that had passed. There was so much blood. I tried to stop it, tried to revive him, but he was already gone. I panicked. I knew no one would believe it was self-defense, not with his influence, his connections. So I ran. She turned to face Samuel, her chin lifted defiantly despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I didn't murder him. I was defending myself from assault, but in the eyes of the law, I'm a killer who fled justice. The charge is murder in the first degree. Samuel was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Eleanor waited, her heart pounding for his judgment. You had no witnesses, he asked finally. None. It was after hours. The school was empty except for us. And you left immediately after, she nodded. I gathered what little money I had, took a night train to New York, then continued west, changing my name and appearance as I went. I've been running ever since. Samuel rose, moving to stand before her. Gently, he took her trembling hands in his. Eleanor Sinclair, I believe you. 3 simple words, yet they nearly broke her. A sob escaped her throat, and before she knew what was happening, she was in his arms, her face pressed against his solid chest as years of fear and loneliness poured out of her in waves. Samuel held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other steady at her waist. He didn't speak, just provided the anchor she so desperately needed as the storm of emotion passed through her. When she finally regained her composure, Eleanor stepped back, embarrassed by her loss of control. I'm sorry, she murmured, wiping at her eyes. I don't apologize, he interrupted gently, not for being human. The tenderness in his voice threatened to undo her again. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. What happens now? She asked. Before Samuel could answer, the door opened and Rose entered, her expression grave. Sam, we have a problem. Jenkins just rode out headed toward town. Samuel cursed under his breath. He's going to the marshal. That would be my guess, Rose agreed. I tried to stop him, but he said something about the reward being enough to buy his own spread. Eleanor felt the familiar cold dread settle in her stomach. I need to leave, now, and go where? Samuel challenged. On foot, in the dark, with a storm still threatening and a marshal who knows exactly what you look like on your trail. I can't stay here. she insisted. I won't let you and Rose risk yourselves for me. We're already involved, Rose pointed out pragmatically. The marshal knows you were here. The question is what we do next. Samuel paced the room, his mind clearly working through possibilities. How long do we have before Jenkins reaches town? An hour, maybe less, Rose estimated. The creek's still high at the main crossing, but if he takes Miller's Bridge, he could make it faster. Samuel nodded decisively. Then we have an hour to formulate a plan. Rose, gather some provisions, food, blankets, basic supplies. Eleanor, you'll need warmer clothes for where we're going. Eleanor echoed, confused. Samuel, you can't come with me, your life is here. He turned to face her, his expression resolute. My father always said a Kierney never abandons someone in need. Besides, you'll need someone who knows the territory. But your ranch, Rose, can handle things here. It won't be the first time I've been away on ranch business. Rose nodded in agreement. I'll tell everyone you've gone to negotiate with that cattle buyer from Denver. It's believable enough. Eleanor looked between the siblings, overwhelmed by their willingness to help her. I don't know what to say. Say you'll trust us, Samuel replied simply. That's all we ask. She studied his face, the steady eyes, the firm set of his jaw, the quiet confidence that had drawn her to him from the beginning. In that moment, Eleanor made her choice. I trust you. The hour that followed was a flurry of activity. Rose packed a saddlebag with provisions while Samuel prepared the horses. Eleanor changed into clothes borrowed from Rose, a practical riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a warm jacket that would serve her better on the trail than her own more fashionable attire. We'll head for the old line cabin in the high country, Samuel explained as they worked. It's remote enough that few know of its existence, and the approaching storm will cover our tracks. How long can we stay there? Eleanor asked, securing her hair in a simple braid, as long as necessary. It's stocked with basic supplies, and I know how to live off the land if needed. He paused, meeting her gaze. But it's only a temporary solution, Eleanor. Eventually, we'll need to clear your name. How? There's no evidence, no witnesses, just my word against the reputation of a dead man. There's always a way, he said with quiet confidence. We just need to find it. As they prepared to leave, Rose pulled Eleanor into a tight embrace. Take care of my brother, she whispered, and let him take care of you, he's good at it. Thank you, Eleanor replied, her voice thick with emotion, for everything. Family helps family, Rose said simply, as if Eleanor already belonged to them. Now go before that marshal decides to check here first instead of waiting for Jenkins. They slipped out the back door and through the shadows to the barn, where 2 horses waited, saddled and ready. Samuel helped Eleanor mount, then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. Stay close, he instructed. We'll take the creek trail for the first few miles. The water will hide our tracks, then cut up through Falcon Pass. It's a difficult route, but one the marshal is unlikely to know. Eleanor nodded, gathering her reins. Lead on. They rode out into the night, the only sound the soft thud of hooves on damp earth and the distant rumble of thunder as the storm gathered strength once more. Eleanor cast one last glance at the warm lights of the Kierney ranch house, wondering if she would ever see it again. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel spoke quietly. We'll be back, I promise you that. She wanted desperately to believe him. The trail was treacherous in the darkness, but Samuel navigated it with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the land. They rode in the shallow edge of the creek for nearly 2 miles, the water occasionally reaching the horses' knees, before turning onto a narrow path that wound upward into the hills. Rain began to fall again, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. Eleanor pulled her borrowed hat lower, grateful for its protection. Despite the discomfort, she welcomed the storm. It would indeed cover their tracks, just as Samuel had predicted. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and drink from Samuel's canteen. Eleanor was exhausted, her body aching from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she made no complaint. Every mile they covered was another mile between her and the marshal who hunted her. As dawn broke, they reached a small plateau sheltered by towering pines. Samuel dismounted, helping Eleanor down from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled as they touched the ground, and he steadied her with a strong hand at her elbow. We'll rest here for an hour, he said. The horses need it, and so do you. I'm fine, she insisted, though the exhaustion was evident in her voice. Samuel's expression softened. You don't have to be strong every minute, Eleanor, not anymore. The simple statement, delivered with such quiet understanding, threatened to undo her carefully maintained composure. She turned away, blinking back tears. I've been running so long, she whispered. I don't know how to stop. Then let me help you remember. He moved to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. You're not alone anymore. Eleanor looked up at him, this man who had risked everything to help a stranger based on nothing more than faith in her word. In his eyes, she saw something she'd thought never to find again: trust, respect, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know me. Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When I was in the war, I saw what happens when good people stand by and let injustice prevail. I swore then that I would never be that kind of man. He met her gaze directly. And there's something about you, Eleanor Sinclair. Something that tells me you're worth fighting for. The honesty in his voice took her breath away. Before she could respond, he turned back to the horses. Try to rest. I'll keep watch. Eleanor sat beneath a pine tree, wrapping herself in the blanket Samuel had provided. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind was too full of the danger they faced, of the uncertain future ahead, and of the man who sat a few yards away, his rifle across his knees as he scanned the valley below. What would happen when this was over? If they somehow managed to clear her name, would she stay in Promise Creek as she'd planned? Would Samuel return to his ranch and the life he'd built there? The questions circled in her mind, unanswerable for now. After an hour's rest, they continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture, fog clinging to the slopes around them. The cabin is just ahead, Samuel said as they crested a ridge in the early afternoon. We should reach it before nightfall. True to his word, the small structure came into view as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks. It was a simple log cabin, weathered by years of mountain storms but still solid. A small corral stood to one side with a lean-to shelter for the horses. It's not much, Samuel said as they dismounted, but it's sturdy and well hidden. It's perfect, Eleanor assured him, relief washing over her at the sight of shelter after their long journey. While Samuel tended to the horses, Eleanor explored the cabin. It was indeed basic one-room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves stocked with essential supplies. But it was clean and dry, and after the grueling ride, it seemed as luxurious as any Boston mansion. Samuel joined her, carrying their saddlebags. My father built this place 30 years ago when he first claimed the land. He used it as a hunting cabin until the main house was completed. It's been well maintained, Eleanor observed. I come up here a few times a year to check on things and to— He paused, searching for the right words. To remember why I do what I do. The view from that ridge to the east, it reminds me of what's worth protecting. There was something in his voice that made Eleanor look at him more closely. You don't always want to be a rancher, do you? His eyebrows rose in surprise at her perception. The ranch is my legacy, my responsibility. That's not what I asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment, stoking the fire he'd just lit in the fireplace. No, he admitted finally. When I was younger, I wanted to study law. I had this idea that I could help bring justice to the frontier where it's often in short supply. What happened? The war. Then my parents' passing. The ranch needed me and Rose needed me. Dreams sometimes have to wait. Eleanor felt a pang of understanding. Her own dreams of a simple teaching career had been shattered by circumstances beyond her control. Perhaps they're just delayed, not denied, she suggested softly. He glanced up at her, a smile touching his lips. Perhaps. As darkness fell, they shared a simple meal of jerky, hard bread, and coffee boiled over the fire. The wind had picked up outside, whistling around the eaves of the cabin and rattling the single window. Another storm coming, Samuel observed. Good for us, it'll make tracking difficult. How long do you think we can stay here? Eleanor asked, warming her hands on her coffee cup. A week, maybe two, before supplies run low. By then, the marshal might have moved on, assuming we fled the territory. And if he hasn't, Samuel's expression grew serious, then we'll need to consider our next move. I have friends further north in Wyoming who might shelter us while we figure out how to clear your name. Samuel, Eleanor said hesitantly, I appreciate everything you're doing more than I can express, but I don't see how my name can be cleared. There's no evidence to support my story, no witnesses to what happened that night. There must be something, he insisted. What about this Mrs. Hawthorne? You said you spoke to her about Winthrop's behavior. Yes, but she warned me against making accusations. I doubt she'd risk her position to support me now. She might, if approached correctly. And what about other women? A man like Winthrop, with his sense of entitlement, you likely weren't his first victim. Eleanor considered this. There was talk. Rumors about his interest in other teachers before me. Nothing specific, just whispers among the staff. That's a starting point. Samuel leaned forward intently. If we could find others he harassed or assaulted, establish a pattern of behavior, it would lend credibility to your account. Even if we could, how would we reach them from here? Boston is 2,000 miles away. One step at a time, he advised. First, we ensure your immediate safety. Then we gather information. I have contacts in Denver who might be able to make discreet inquiries back east. Finally, we build a case strong enough to present to authorities who can't be bought or intimidated. The confidence in his voice was almost enough to make Eleanor believe such a thing was possible. Almost. It could take months, she pointed out. Years, even. Do you have somewhere more pressing to be? He asked, a hint of a smile softening his words. Despite herself, Eleanor laughed, a sound of genuine amusement that surprised her. How long had it been since she'd laughed like that? No, she admitted. I suppose I don't. Then we have time. His gaze held hers across the small table. Eleanor, I know this seems impossible now, but I promise you I won't stop until you're free to live without looking over your shoulder. You deserve that chance. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her, a place she'd thought long closed off. For the first time since that terrible night in Boston, Eleanor allowed herself to feel something dangerous and fragile. Hope. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when no one else would. Someone should have, he said simply. Long before now, the days at the cabin fell into a rhythm. Samuel would rise at dawn to check their surroundings, ensuring no unwelcome visitors had discovered their hideaway. Eleanor would prepare a simple breakfast from their supplies, and they would plan their day over steaming cups of coffee. There was work to be done to make the cabin more comfortable for an extended stay. They repaired a section of roof that had begun to leak, gathered firewood for the increasingly cold nights, and set snares for rabbits to supplement their provisions. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, talking long into the night. Eleanor told Samuel about her childhood in Massachusetts, her love of literature, her dreams of opening her own school someday. In turn, he shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of his experiences during the war, of the hopes he still harbored for bringing more law and civilization to the frontier. On the fifth day, as a light snow dusted the mountains around them, Samuel taught Eleanor how to shoot his Winchester rifle. I know how to use a revolver, she told him as they stood on a small clearing behind the cabin, but I've never fired a long gun. The principles are similar, he explained, positioning the rifle in her hands. But the weight and balance are different. Take your time, feel how it sits against your shoulder. Eleanor concentrated on his instructions, trying to ignore the warmth of his body as he stood close behind her, adjusting her stance. His hands covered hers, showing her how to hold the weapon properly. Now, breathe in, he murmured, his voice close to her ear. And as you exhale, squeeze the trigger gently, don't pull it. She did as instructed, and the rifle cracked, the recoil pushing her back slightly against Samuel's solid chest. The tin can they'd set up on a stump 30 yards away remained untouched. I missed, she said, disappointment evident in her voice. Everyone misses their first shot, he assured her. Try again, this time keep both eyes open. The second shot went wide as well, but on the third attempt, the can flew off the stump with a satisfying ping. I did it. Eleanor exclaimed, turning to Samuel with a smile of triumph. His answering smile made her heart skip a beat. I knew you would. You're a natural. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Eleanor felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. Over the past days, something had been growing between them, something neither had acknowledged aloud, but that existed nonetheless, as real as the mountains around them. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the rabbit stew Eleanor had prepared, Samuel broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. What will you do, Eleanor, when this is over? She looked up from her bowl, considering, if by some miracle my name is cleared. I suppose I'll do what I originally planned, find a teaching position, perhaps in Promise Creek or somewhere similar. Somewhere quiet where I can build a new life. And if we can't clear your name completely, but can ensure your safety. It was a possibility she'd considered during their long talks that they might find a way to make the charges disappear or ensure they were never pursued without fully exonerating her. Then I suppose I'd need to settle somewhere even more remote. Change my name again, perhaps. The thought filled her with weariness. I'm tired of running, Samuel, tired of being someone else. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. You deserve better. We don't always get what we deserve in this life, she replied, with a touch of the bitterness she'd carried for so long. No, he agreed. But sometimes, if we're fortunate, we get something we never expected instead. His gaze met hers across the small table, and the intensity she saw there made her breath catch. There was a question in his eyes one she wasn't ready to answer, not with so much uncertainty still surrounding her future. Before either could speak again, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable whinny of a horse that wasn't theirs. Samuel was on his feet instantly, dousing the lantern while Eleanor quickly cleared the table. They moved with the efficiency of those accustomed to danger, communicating without words. Samuel took his rifle from its place by the door, checking that it was loaded. Stay inside, he whispered. If anything happens to me, there's a hidden space beneath the floorboards under the bed, food and water for a few days, and a pistol. Eleanor gripped his arm. Be careful. He covered her hand with his for a brief moment, then slipped out the door into the gathering darkness. The minutes stretched endlessly as Eleanor waited, her heart pounding in her ears. She positioned herself near the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains, but could see nothing in the deepening twilight. Then suddenly, a voice carried through the stillness, not Samuel's, but one that sent a chill down her spine. I know you're in there, Miss Sinclair. No need to make this difficult. Marshal Wilcox. Eleanor's mind raced. How had he found them? Where was Samuel? As if in answer to her unspoken question, she heard a grunt of pain, then the sound of something or someone falling heavily to the ground. Your protector won't be joining us for a while, the marshal called. Come out now, and I promise he won't be charged as an accessory. Stay inside, make me come get you, and he'll hang alongside you in Boston. Fear gripped Eleanor's heart, not for herself but for Samuel. She had involved him in her troubles, and now he was paying the price for his kindness. Making her decision, Eleanor moved to the door. She would surrender herself rather than risk Samuel's life. But as her hand touched the latch, she hesitated, remembering Samuel's words. You don't have to be strong every minute, not anymore. He had promised to help her find a way out of this nightmare. He believed in her innocence. Was she really going to give up now, after everything they'd been through? Moving swiftly, Eleanor retrieved Samuel's spare revolver from the drawer where he kept it. She checked that it was loaded, then slipped out the back window of the cabin, dropping silently to the ground below. The night was cold, the thin layer of snow reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Eleanor crept along the side of the cabin, keeping to the shadows, her heart hammering in her chest. She could see them now, Marshal Wilcox standing in the clearing before the cabin, his gun trained on the door. Samuel lay on the ground nearby, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder, his face contorted in pain but his eyes alert. Eleanor raised the revolver, aiming it at the marshal's back. Her hand trembled slightly, but she steadied it, remembering Samuel's lessons. Marshal Wilcox, she called clearly, lower your weapon. The man turned slowly, his expression registering surprise when he saw her standing there, armed and resolute. Miss Sinclair, he said, his voice deceptively calm, you're only making things worse for yourself. I don't see how they could be worse, she replied. I'm already facing a hanging for a crime I didn't commit. That's for a court to decide. A court controlled by Winthrop's family and friends? I think not. Eleanor kept the revolver leveled at his chest. Now, drop your gun and step away from Mr. Kierney. Wilcox's eyes narrowed, assessing her. You won't shoot me, Miss Sinclair. You're not a killer, despite what the warrant says. You're right, she admitted. I'm not a killer. I defended myself against a man who tried to violate me, just as I'll defend myself and Mr. Kierney now if necessary. The choice is yours, Marshal. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Wilcox lowered his weapon. Kick it away, Eleanor instructed, and he complied, the gun landing several feet from where Samuel lay. Samuel was struggling to sit up, his hand pressed to his wounded shoulder. Eleanor, be careful, he warned. He's not alone. Too late, Eleanor sensed movement behind her. Before she could turn, something hard struck the back of her head and darkness claimed her. When Eleanor regained consciousness, she was inside the cabin, lying on the bed. Her head throbbed painfully, and for a moment she couldn't remember what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The marshal, Samuel, wounded, the blow to her head. She sat up too quickly, causing the room to spin around her. Easy, a familiar voice cautioned. You took quite a hit. Samuel sat in a chair beside the bed, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. Samuel, Eleanor reached for him, relief washing over her. You're alive, but what happened? Rose happened, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. She arrived with Jenkins and two of our most trusted ranch hands just after you were knocked out. It seems Jenkins had a change of heart after seeing the marshal's methods up close. He went to Rose, confessed what he'd done, and offered to help make it right. Eleanor tried to process this unexpected turn of events. And the marshal? Currently tied up in the lean-to, along with his deputy, the one who hit you. Rose is keeping watch over them while we decide what to do next. They'll never stop hunting me, Eleanor said, the brief flare of hope fading. Even if we manage to escape them now, they just send others. Perhaps, Samuel agreed, unless we change the narrative. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the door opened and Rose entered, stomping snow from her boots. Our guests are secure, she reported, though the marshal is making all sorts of threats about what will happen when he's free. Let him threaten, Samuel replied calmly. He won't be in a position to carry them out. Rose moved to Eleanor's side, examining the back of her head with gentle fingers. That's quite a lump, but the skin isn't broken. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a mule, Eleanor admitted. But I'll survive. Good, because we've got work to do. Rose looked to her brother. I brought what you asked for. She produced a leather satchel from beneath her coat and handed it to Samuel. He opened it, revealing several sheets of paper, a bottle of ink, and a pen. What is this? Eleanor asked. The beginning of our counterattack, Samuel explained. Rose, tell her what you found. Rose perched on the edge of the bed. After you and Sam fled, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I telegraphed a friend in Denver who works for the newspaper there. Asked her to make some discreet inquiries about Charles Winthrop and the circumstances of his death. Eleanor stared at her in astonishment. And she was able to learn something, more than something, Rose confirmed with satisfaction. It seems Mr. Winthrop had quite a reputation in certain circles. 3 former teachers at your school had similar experiences to yours, unwanted advances, threats when they refused him. None of them spoke publicly, of course. They were too afraid of the consequences. But how did your friend discover this? One of those teachers now lives in Denver. She was willing to speak to my friend, once assured her name would be protected, and she provided the names of others who might corroborate the pattern. Hope, tentative but real, began to bloom in Eleanor's chest. So there are witnesses who could testify to Winthrop's character and behavior. Yes, Samuel confirmed, if we can convince them it's safe to do so. But first we need to neutralize the immediate threat, namely Marshal Wilcox. How? He's a federal marshal. We can't simply let him go, and we certainly can't. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to complete the thought. No, we can't harm him, Samuel agreed, but we can give him a reason to reconsider his pursuit of you. He spread the papers on the small table, and Eleanor saw that they were formatted like newspaper articles, with headlines and columns. What are these? The articles that will be published in newspapers across the country if anything happens to you, Samuel explained. Detailing Winthrop's history of predatory behavior, the cover-up by Boston's elite, and the miscarriage of justice in your case. Eleanor's eyes widened as she read the draft before her. It told her story in clear, compelling terms, naming names and providing specific details that would be devastating to the reputations of many prominent Bostonians. But these haven't been published yet, she pointed out. No, Rose confirmed. But sealed copies have been entrusted to lawyers in Denver, St. Louis, and Chicago, with instructions to release them to the press if you are arrested, harmed, or simply disappear. It's insurance, Samuel added. The Winthrop family and their allies value their reputations above all else. The threat of this kind of scandal might be enough to make them call off the hunt. Eleanor looked between the siblings, amazed at the thoroughness of their plan. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Samuel admitted, but enough to give us leverage in negotiations. Negotiations. Eleanor echoed, with Marshal Wilcox. I believe he's a reasonable man beneath the bluster, and more importantly, I believe he's a man who follows orders. If his superiors tell him to abandon the case, he will. And why would they do that? Because the alternative would be a scandal that would reach all the way to Washington. Samuel's expression was grimly determined. The Federal Marshal's Service doesn't want to be seen as the enforcement arm of corrupt Boston businessmen, especially not in an election year. Eleanor considered the plan, scarcely daring to believe it might work. Even if Wilcox agrees to back off, what about the charges against me? They'll still exist. One step at a time, Samuel advised. First, we secure your immediate safety, then we work on clearing your name completely. Rose stood, stretching her back. I should check on our prisoners. Will you be all right, Eleanor? Yes, thank you, Rose. Eleanor reached for the younger woman's hand, squeezing it gratefully, for everything. After Rose left, Samuel moved to sit beside Eleanor on the bed, his expression serious. There's something else we need to discuss, he said quietly. Something I've been thinking about since we arrived here. Eleanor's heart quickened at his tone. What is it? If this works, if we can convince Wilcox to abandon the pursuit, you'll still need protection until your name is fully cleared. A legal standing that would make it more difficult for anyone to simply take you into custody. I don't understand. Samuel took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Eleanor, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow not entirely surprising. Eleanor stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this was merely a practical suggestion, part of their strategy. What she saw instead took her breath away: tenderness, respect, and something deeper that made her heart race. Samuel, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I can't let you sacrifice yourself like that. Your reputation, your future, it's not a sacrifice, he interrupted firmly. Not if it's what I want. We've known each other less than 2 weeks. And in that time, I've learned more about your character, your courage, and your heart than I have about people I've known for years. His hand tightened around hers. I'm not proposing because it's practical, though it is. I'm proposing because these days with you, despite the danger and uncertainty, have been the most alive I've felt since before the war. Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes. Samuel, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Think about it. But know that my offer comes from a place of deep respect and growing affection. Whatever you decide, I will continue to stand by you until this is resolved. Before she could respond, the door opened again and Rose reappeared. Marshal Wilcox is ready to talk, she announced. Though he's not happy about it, Samuel nodded, reluctantly releasing Eleanor's hand. Let's see if he's reasonable. The negotiations with Marshal Wilcox were tense but ultimately productive. Presented with the evidence of Winthrop's pattern of behavior and the threat of widespread scandal if he persisted in his pursuit of Eleanor, the marshal grudgingly agreed to send a telegraph to his superiors recommending the case be reviewed. I can't promise they'll drop the charges, he warned, but I can tell them the evidence against you is shakier than initially reported. That's all we ask, Samuel replied, a fair review of the facts, and in the meantime, Eleanor pressed. Wilcox sighed heavily. In the meantime, I have more pressing matters to attend to. train robberies near Cheyenne, land disputes in the Northern Territory. I can't waste resources on a case that might be dismissed anyway. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more than Eleanor had dared hope for. When the marshal and his deputy departed the following morning with a warning that they'd be watching, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It worked, she marveled, watching from the cabin door as the lawman disappeared down the mountain trail. I can hardly believe it. It's just the beginning, Samuel cautioned, standing beside her. But yes, it's a start. They returned to the Kierney ranch 2 days later after ensuring the marshal had indeed left the area. Rose welcomed them with open arms and the news that she'd received a telegraph from her friend in Denver. 2 more former teachers had come forward with accounts of Winthrop's misconduct, strengthening their case. Life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor took a room at the boarding house in Promise Creek, and to her surprise, was offered the teaching position she'd originally sought. The town council, impressed by her credentials and unaware of the controversy surrounding her, voted unanimously to hire her. Samuel rode into town frequently, ostensibly on ranch business but primarily to see Eleanor. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, but their growing attachment was difficult to disguise. 3 months after their return from the mountain cabin, Eleanor received a letter that changed everything. It was from Mrs. Hawthorne, her former headmistress in Boston, responding to an inquiry Rose's friend had made. "She's confirmed everything," Eleanor told Samuel that evening as they sat on the porch of the schoolhouse. "And more importantly, she's written a formal statement testifying that Winthrop had harassed other teachers and that she had warned him to stay away from the school just days before his death." Samuel took the letter, reading it carefully. This is exactly what we needed. With this and the other testimonies, we have a strong case for self-defense. Do you think it will be enough? I believe so. My friend in Denver, the lawyer I told you about, thinks the charges could be dropped entirely with this evidence. At the very least, they could be reduced to manslaughter, with time served considered sufficient punishment. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the possibility that her ordeal might truly be ending. I never thought this day would come. I told you we'd find a way, Samuel reminded her, his voice gentle. You just needed to trust me. I do trust you, Samuel, more than I've ever trusted anyone. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. And I've been thinking about your proposal. His expression grew serious. You have? Yes, Eleanor took a deep breath. My answer is yes, but not because I need protection anymore, because I love you and I want to build a life with you if you'll still have me. The joy that spread across Samuel's face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. Eleanor Sinclair, I have loved you since that first day in the canyon when you stood your ground despite your fear. Yes, I'll still have you today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come. He drew her into his arms, and when their lips met, Eleanor felt the last of her walls crumble. She had spent so long running, so long hiding, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be, to be known, to be loved, to be home. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Eleanor Sinclair became Eleanor Kierney in a simple ceremony in Promise Creek's newly built church. Rose stood as her bridesmaid, beaming with happiness for her brother and the woman who had become like a sister to her. The charges against Eleanor had been formally dropped 2 months prior, after Mrs. Hawthorne and 3 other former teachers had provided sworn statements about Winthrop's behavior. The Boston newspapers had published brief notices of the development, acknowledging that new evidence had come to light, suggesting Eleanor had acted in self-defense. The scandal that the Winthrop family had feared had been largely contained, though their reputation had suffered nonetheless. It was a compromise that allowed both sides to claim some measure of victory, and more importantly, it allowed Eleanor to finally stop looking over her shoulder. As Samuel and Eleanor exchanged their vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had fled west with nothing but fear and determination, certain that her past would forever define her future. Instead, she had found a man who saw beyond her circumstances to the woman she truly was, and who had helped her reclaim not just her freedom, but her hope. I pronounce you husband and wife, the pastor declared, and as Samuel kissed her before the assembled townsfolk of Promise Creek, Eleanor knew with certainty that she was, at last, truly home. Epilogue 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the Kierney ranch house, carried on the warm summer breeze. Eleanor looked up from the book she was reading to their 3-year-old daughter, Charlotte, and smiled at the sight of Samuel teaching their 5-year-old son, James, named for his uncle, how to ride his first pony. "Again, Papa, again," James called as Samuel led the gentle pony around the corral. "One more time, then we need to help Mama get ready for the party," Samuel replied, his deep voice carrying clearly across the yard. Eleanor closed the book, setting it aside. "What do you say, Charlotte? Shall we go see if Aunt Rose needs help with the cake?" The little girl nodded eagerly, her dark curls bouncing. She had Eleanor's eyes and Samuel's determined chin, a perfect blend of them both, just as James had Samuel's stormy gray eyes and Eleanor's quick mind. In the kitchen, Rose was putting the finishing touches on an elaborate cake, helped by her own daughter, 2-year-old Emma. Rose had married the town doctor 3 years earlier, after a whirlwind courtship that had surprised everyone except Eleanor, who had seen the spark between them from their first meeting. "Is everything ready for the celebration?" Eleanor asked, setting Charlotte down to play with her cousin. "Nearly," Rose confirmed. "The men have set up tables in the yard and most of the food is prepared. I just need to finish this cake." The celebration was in honor of the new schoolhouse in Promise Creek, a 2-story building with separate classrooms for different age groups, a library stocked with books Samuel had ordered from back east, and living quarters for the 2 teachers now required to educate the town's growing population of children. Eleanor still taught 3 days a week, sharing the duties with a young woman freshly arrived from Pennsylvania. The arrangement allowed her to balance her passion for education with her life on the ranch and her growing family. Samuel entered the kitchen, James trailing behind him. "How are my favorite ladies today?" "Busy," Rose replied with mock severity. "Unlike some people who get to play with ponies all morning." Samuel grinned, unrepentant, and crossed to Eleanor, placing a kiss on her forehead. "Teaching the next generation of Kierneys to ride is serious business, isn't it, James?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Very serious, Mama," Eleanor laughed, ruffling her son's hair. "I'm sure it is. Now go wash up for lunch, both of you." As Samuel led James to the wash basin, Eleanor felt a wave of contentment wash over her. 5 years ago, she had been running for her life, certain she would never know peace again. Now she stood in a home filled with love and laughter, surrounded by family, respected in her community, free from the shadows of her past. The journey hadn't always been easy. There had been difficult moments, nightmares that still occasionally plagued her. A brief encounter with a Boston acquaintance passing through the territory who had nearly recognized her before her name was cleared. The challenges of adjusting to ranch life after years in the city. But through it all, Samuel had been her constant, her anchor. He had kept his promise to build her a future one day at a time with patience and unwavering faith in her strength. "Penny for your thoughts," he said now, returning to her side as the children chattered with Rose about the cake. Eleanor smiled up at him, her heart full. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed. For the better, I hope." His eyes searched hers, still with that same intensity that had first captured her attention. "For the better," she confirmed, reaching up to touch his face. "In every way." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Eleanor and Samuel stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The children were already asleep, worn out from the day's excitement. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked softly. "Taking a chance on me when I was nothing but trouble and danger." Samuel turned to her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Not for a single moment. You were worth every risk, Eleanor, you still are." He pulled her into his arms, and as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Eleanor Kierney knew with absolute certainty that while she could never fully erase her past, the future Samuel had helped her build was more than enough compensation for the trials she had endured. She had tried to hide her past, and he had built her a future instead. A future of love, family, purpose, and belonging, a future more beautiful than she could have imagined in her darkest hours. And that, she thought as she leaned into her husband's embrace, was worth everything.